Hi, welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk. Today's topic is God's will. What is God's will? How does God's will work? And how is that supplemented by my own will, our own wills? So with that, let's talk.
So recently, I was having a discussion with a friend, and we were talking about God's will and do we even have free will, or how do we even perceive our own free will? And a couple of verses came up. I'll read them out. So the first is from Ephesians 1. He chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love, having predestined us to adoption as sons by Jesus Christ to himself, according to the good pleasure of his will. I think the word predestined seemed to bother this person a little bit. And then also we see in Revelations 13:8, Christ is referred to as the Lamb slain since the foundation of the world. So this whole story of salvation is already planned. And so, like, how do I understand, do I even have free will in any of this, or the fact that I've come to be and this is my life and, you know, this is my ending? So that's kind of the discussion I was having. So.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting kind of question, because it brings about the idea or the presupposition that God's in control of everything. He controls everything to the small details. Therefore, if he wills something, it happens, and no one else can control that. And therefore, that definition of the way God's will works and his control of the world is presupposed in that person's question. And I think in order for us to understand God's will, we probably need to break it down a little bit. So there's probably three areas in order for us to kind of have this conversation. So there's the first one, which is really about, you know, the things that God wills and controls regardless of what we think about it or what we do or how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's things that God wills for us as his creation, his collective creation to do. And then there are things that God wills specifically for me in a particular time, in a particular context. And all three have different modes of operation and different kind of criteria and discussion. So I think sometimes when we blend those things together, we get confused. And I think that's probably where this person's coming from.
Yeah. So I mean, how do we approach, like, so? All right. Let's talk about the first question, which is the will of God, where we don't necessarily have a say in the matter. So how, like, and that kind of comes back to obviously the divine plan for humanity. So what is that?
Well, if you think about it, like, so if we try and get into God's head a little bit, and you say, all right, I'm here, I'm hanging around, the Spirit of God hovers on nothingness, and I've decided to create the world. It's like, did he take anyone's opinion on that? It's like, no, it's my sovereign right to create whatever and whoever, whenever I want. And therefore, he doesn't take the opinion of the creation. He doesn't include creation in his decision to create. And that's an example of God's will that doesn't need anything from the outside to exist. And no matter what creation said at that point, God was always going to create the world. He was going to bring into existence what is not existing. And that would be an example of his sovereign will, his global kind of will to do what he wants regardless of anything else. That's an example. And I think some of the verses you read out were another example of that. So God knows that he will create, and at the same time the consequence of his creation is that his son, the second person of the Trinity, will have to be slain in order to bring about the fullness of creation.
So a consequence of creating humanity with a rational soul and free will is the fact that humanity is going to not be able to live up to be the perfect human, and thus fall away from the purpose, the divine purpose, and thus that's where Christ comes in. Is that what you?
Yeah. So it's in his will to create. He accepts that in order for me to create, I will have to enter into my creation.
Yeah.
And God, the second person of the Trinity, so the Son of God, enters into his creation. All from the beginning of the world, we see God, this idea in Genesis of God walking with Adam.
Mm-hmm.
There is an interaction. And so God has entered into his creation. If you think of that is a type of sacrifice. It's like God entering into the thing that he created is from the beginning always his plan, is that by entering into creation, you're in some way limiting yourself. And so from the moment he creates the world, he's already put a plan that he will always interact. The fullness of that happens in incarnation, in that this Son extends his creative work to the point that not only now has he entered and interacts with his creation, he manifests the reality of God as a man and God at the same time, and he's willing to put himself to the cross and to be slain for the world. He knew that was going to happen the moment he created the world, and he accepted that. And nothing we did, you didn't have an opinion on that, I didn't have an opinion on that. Nothing in his creation had an opinion on that.
So it's like, Adam and Eve, like we put a lot of blame on them for, eating from the tree and causing all of this, but this was the divine plan. Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think it was. We can't say it was God's plan for them to fall. I would say that because of God's foreknowledge, he understands that will happen, but that's still their freedom to do that.
Yeah.
But the will of God appears at the moment of creation. It's like if you put yourself in the conversation that God has with himself. It's like, I want to bring about creation, and I want to bring about creation in a very specific way, in that creation, when you look at that creation, it reflects me. In order for me to do that, I have to give them the freedom to choose to be me or not to be me. And in so, that he knows that they have, he knows that they will fall. And as a result of that fall, he has to enter into his creation in a way that will result in his death and his limitation. That's different.
Just a question from behind the camera, question coming in.
Yeah.
The question is, so why does it say in Genesis 6 that God regretted making man? Just in light of what you just said.
In the story of Noah, you mean?
In the story of Noah.
That's what the question says, so I'm just reading it verbatim.
So I think if you extend that story, so you take, all right, God decides to say, hey, I'm going to create, and as a result, I have to enter into that creation. There comes a point where God says, all right, well, you decide to go outside. That's your decision. You've gone and you've entered and entertained death. That was man's will. And as a result, humanity degrades to a point that God no longer recognizes humanity. He looks at his creature or his creation and doesn't recognize the creation anymore. And so what Genesis 6 is saying is that God has created humanity so that humanity may look like God, basically. It's like sanctified to the point that humanity can reflect the image of God. And God looks at humanity and doesn't see anymore his reflection. And so he's not regretting the decision to create. He's regretting that man has become in a total opposite to the purpose.
Completely distorted
image. And so it's like, I regret that this is what has befallen man, is essentially what's going on here.
So God's will is sovereign, right? And as you mentioned before, it does not necessarily matter what we think of this is the plan, the divine plan, as you were saying. But it seems like sometimes humanity's free will or our own will is stronger than God's will. Like, it counteracts. Like, we become unrecognizable in the face of God. So how does that work in light of God's sovereignty if we
and so
degrade that?
and so these are the things. So the things that he will do, no matter what anybody else, creation and salvation. These are things he chooses to act upon. And if you think of salvation, salvation is just an extension of his creation. It's not a unique dimension or mode of operation of God. Salvation is part of his creation story. It's the restoration or the readjustment of creation. It's just an extension. And so in his sovereignty to create, he's the same as in his sovereignty to save. An example of that in the Noah story is the fact that he decides to renew creation the way he does. No one could stop that. But did he get in the way of humanity deciding to venture away from his image and turn into the image of an unrecognizable creation? He didn't intervene in that. That's not where he applies his sovereign creativity. But bringing about the renewal of humanity, he doesn't take Noah's opinion, he doesn't take anyone's opinion, he brings that about. And so that's the difference between that's why we're kind of breaking it into three levels, is that there's this sovereign thing that he does regardless. It's like saving humanity. I will do regardless of what you think. God never asks us should I come and take the form of man and be crucified? Did he ask you? Or didn't ask me. He doesn't ask anybody in the Bible if that's a good idea or not. He does it because that's his will, and it's his sovereign will, and he doesn't need anyone to interact. Actually, all the way through humanity, it didn't actually matter what humanity did. God always was going to come. So it's like, the world is bad, the world is good, they listen to me, they don't listen to me, I don't care. The moment St. Mary appears, the 12 disciples, in that particular context, the incarnation occurs. Regardless of the state of humanity and regardless of what humanity cared about.
I think it also, there's another question to the sovereign will. It's like, well, I never asked to be made. And I guess that's one thing that
wrongful life.
Yeah. Well, that's a sovereign thing, isn't it? Where I was never asked to be made, but then also I was never asked to die, and they're two things that we can't control in our own lives. Yeah. So then why does God make people if he knows that they're going to be, not want to be with him?
So, in having said these things that God wills that no one else has control over, you'll find that these things are very limited to his creation and to his salvation. It's like God intervenes to save the world or to save me as an individual in that world. But going back to the original question that you had from your friend, which was, it seems like if you believe that there is the will of God, there must not be the will of human. Like, as an individual, I no longer have a will because he's already pre-planned and predestined everything. If you take this, what we've just spoken about is kind of God will enforce his creation and enforce his salvation. Everything in between, God very rarely intervenes sovereignly. Like, if the roof was to cave in right now, could we say that God was in control, that he caused it? I'm not sure.
But the legal term is an act of God, so that's why a lot of people this is God's fault. It's a big problem.
Yeah, and I think that probably comes from the Western culture a little bit. You see it in our legal system, you see it in the way we interact with everything, but it's not really in line with the way I would see God, in that there are things we have chosen to enter into this world in its state and in its decay and in its chaos. And God says, all right, you're in here and you're going to interact with this. So the forces of nature, things falling, sickness, disease. God is not in, we can't say that God is in control of what is occurring to the nth degree, that he is moving things like a puppeteer. This is definitely not our experience of God. What God has done, and the reason I can say that with some certainty is that when the Son of God enters into humanity, he gets exposed to the same environment we're in. And he doesn't interact with the world to craft it the way he wants it necessarily minute to minute. What he does is he says to us something along the lines of, no matter what is to happen by nature, I can take that, as long as you walk with me, I can take that, transform it for your salvation. It's like the cross. The cross looks horrific. It's like you went to the cross, you got crucified, an injustice by the people that you came to love, and to, like, it's a horrific idea. And then he takes that cross and he turns it into resurrection. And the message in that is, I'm not pulling strings like that, but for everything that happens, the roof caves in, if you walk with me, I can turn that into your salvation. And I think that is a different way of understanding God's control. There's he caused the roof to fall, versus the roof fell, and because God was there, he turned that into my edification, into salvation, into blessing, into goodness. And that's why he says, in the world you will have tribulation. He doesn't say, in the world I'm going to make your life really bad just so I can prove that I can fix it. He doesn't say that. And I think that's presupposed in that person's question. Yeah. It's like God is so much in control that if anything happens, it's him. And I don't see that. We don't see it play out. And I don't see it in the scripture, and I don't see it in our fathers, that they understand God to be like that.
It's almost like, would you say it's almost like an abdication of responsibility? Again, like, this is a hot topic in the Western world, but it almost sounds like, if we are to link it to the modern day, which it is, essentially, but it's almost like anything that happens to me, it's God's will. Like, you can go through life easy breezy, whatever happens, happens. That's a real attitude a lot of people have. Like, if this bad thing happens to me, it was God's will. If this good thing happens to me, it was God's will. Like, you just throw it onto God all the time.
Yeah, and I think before we started recording, we were having this chat about the personal, because so far we're talking about this level of the will of God, his sovereign will, the things he acts on without anyone's intervention. And the point you just highlighted, which is the desire for us to abdicate our decision-making, becomes really apparent in the personal stuff. It's like the stuff that God leaves up to me totally. Because there's a bunch of things that God leaves to me. Like, he doesn't actually interact with. But those things, we get so caught up on abdicating. Like, we don't want to take the decision. And so we would do everything in our power to try and work out to the nth degree, what does God want? Does God want me to buy the black car or the blue car? Does God want me to marry this person or this person, this job or this? And we confuse that with the sovereign will of God. They're not the same thing. God definitely doesn't want you to abdicate your decision rights. But we can, I think that's really interesting, because some people, and in the question that your friend posed, that's where the confusion happens. It's like, okay, if we're saying God has a will, God can intervene to bring about his will, then surely I'm so important that if I have a matter that is specific, contextual, and bound by time, and I should be able to go to him and say, what's your will? Like, you tell me, should I marry this person or this person? And they're not the same thing. The sovereignty of his will and us knowing what does he want from me right now, it doesn't operate in the same way. God doesn't necessarily always intervene the same way he does here in my day-to-day personal life. That's what you mean, yeah? Is that what you're saying? Like the abdication of responsibility? It's really, that's a personal thing. It's the day-to-day. And sometimes I feel like sometimes we treat God, the will of God, as a crystal ball. So it's like when people are going to ask, hey, what's the will of God? What they mean is, hey, there's a crystal ball thing called God, and I'll go and he should give me the decision. You don't actually care about the will of God. All you care about is someone else make the decision for me. And God is a perfect person to make decisions for us, because you can blame him, because he knows everything. He's powerful and he's almighty. He's like a perfect person to blame. If it's wrong and the decision turns out to be bad, I can say, well, you knew everything and you stuffed it for me. And if it turns out good, it's going to be really good, because he's God. And so it's a perfect person to abdicate responsibility. But I don't think our the will of God interacts on a personal level like that.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that verse in Romans that everyone overquotes: all things work together for good to those who love
28.
God. Yeah. That's like, even whatever we do, whatever we decide, like everything will, as long as we're faithful, that's what's important, right?
You know what's crazy about that? Romans chapter 8, verse 28. I was listening to a sermon, and he says that the person giving the sermon said that the answer to that verse is like immediately like down from that, which is 29. And it says, and you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. I will be found by you. And the reason why the person saying the sermon brought this up was because he was saying that the will of God generally is about an attitude you have, as opposed to like a feeling, as you were saying, this crystal ball. So
yeah, and I think this is our understanding of, like, okay, so the question then turns to, all right, in my day-to-day, so I get the sovereign thing, the God intervenes and he doesn't intervene and all these things is fine. But now, at a personal level, how do I know the will of God?
What is the will of God?
What
on
is
a
it?
personal level?
And how do I know it? And I think that verse is perfect, to be honest, because it tells you everything, no matter what you choose, no matter what you do, if you are walking with God, God will turn that into goodness. And his goodness is his salvation, it's his righteousness, it's his sanctification, it's his all these things, yeah? And then right immediately after that is like, how do I know I'm walking with God? And verse 29 answers it. Seek me diligently. You look for ways and where I am and go after me, and I will be there. And that's how you find God. We don't, between sessions, if we have the crystal ball model, and between every time I grab the crystal ball, I do nothing, definitely you're not going to understand what it is that God wills of us. And I think the idea of what Romans 8:29 is saying is that my whole life has to be seeking him, trying to understand who he is and where he is and what he does. And the more I do that, the more I understand the will of God. Otherwise, every time you get to the crystal ball says nothing, basically.
I think actually what you were
I think
referring
that,
to
I
was
think
actually
that's
Jeremiah.
misquoted. Yeah,
Jeremiah
I was just about to
29.
say, I was like internally panicking. I'm like, I just realized that was a misquote. They were both 29s.
But-
There's
okay.
Jeremiah, but Romans chapter 8, 29, it says this instead, and we know that all things work together. That's 28, but 29,
I
for
think
whom
it's so
he
you're,
foreknew,
I think
predestined. That one.
Jeremiah 29:11 that says, "For I know the thoughts I think towards you," says the Lord, "thoughts of peace and not evil, to give you a future and a hope." I think it's applicable in a very similar way, but I think like maybe let's talk about that a little bit, because I feel like this verse is always overshared, like on New Year's, and whenever someone finishes like VCE year 12, and and it's kind of like almost like the implication is, we hope that you get into the course you want to get, we hope that you do really well, we hope that you have a very comfortable life, and everything's going to be great, right? But then, is this even the will of God? That we have a comfortable life, that we do well, and we prosper in our jobs, and that everything is good, and then we marry the person that we want to marry, and we have a nice car and a nice house. But recently I've been thinking about the martyrs, and I've come across a few stories, and I'm like, this is crazy stuff. Like, I was like, you know the story of Saint Marina? So when she goes to be executed, the guy killing her, he sees an angel, and then he's like, I can't kill you. And then she's like, no, you have to kill me or you're not going to have the kingdom. And then he ends up killing himself, as he martyrs himself, you know, and that's crazy, right? Or then you see other saints that, you know, they encourage their family members to go and to have martyrdom, to be tortured, you know. And it's almost like, are we living a very lukewarm or diluted version of what God's will in our life? Because where does it say that we're supposed to be comfortable and, like, you know, have everything and prosper and be rich and, you know, all this, you know?
Yeah, and I think if we have the idea of trying to find comfort, then the likelihood of finding the will of God all the time is probably going to be quite a difficult task, because if God's will is that humanity, or me as an individual, is to take on his image, is to be sanctified. You know, we spoke about 1 Thessalonians earlier, where it's the will of God is for your sanctity. It's like, that's the will of God. And so sanctity, or my sanctification, or me becoming in the image of God again, needs both modes. It needs the sacrifice, and it needs pain, it needs difficulty, it needs complex decision making, but it also needs comfort, and it needs ease, and it needs joy, and it needs praise and happiness. And those two things are working in the background to sanctify you. The thing that we have the ability to do is to choose is find God and stay as close as possible to his path, and then say, your will be done. And that will sometimes is quite hard, and it's sometimes very joyful, and both can bring sanctity if it's done with that spirit. But yeah, I think if you go through life only looking for the comfortable, you'll definitely miss 50 to 80% of the will of God every time.
And I think it's that question, which I think we'll cover in another podcast. Why is there suffering in the world, or pain, and that? So we'll talk about that another time. But I guess you mentioned, you know, thy will be done. And this is also something that, you know, again, I think people say thy will be done, and they're talking about, like, the personal, those decisions, like, who do I marry, what car do I buy, blah, blah, blah. But then looking at it in context of what Christ is actually telling us to pray, where he says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So when he says thy kingdom come, like, he's not actually talking about the second coming. He's talking about the kingdom of heaven is within us, and the realization of the kingdom of heaven within us. And so when we say thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, well, what happens in heaven? We live in the presence of God. We live with God. So then when we say thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, God's will is for us to live heaven on earth. Like, isn't that just a summary of what God's will is? Does that make sense? And I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think and it comes back to what we said earlier, is like the God's will is for your sanctification. And so if we turn around and say, your will be done, as the way your will is enacted in heaven, let it be here. It's basically saying, bring that sanctification to us. It's bring those things that are useful for my salvation to me, regardless of whether I think it's good or bad. It's bring your sovereign will and apply it specifically to me. So if you take that thing we were talking about, which is the sovereign will of God, I want you to do with me as if you were acting in your sovereign will. It's a very difficult thing to say. Like, we say it every day in our prayer. It's a very scary thing if you think about it. It's like, are you going to handle that when God turns around and does it? is quite a scary thing. But realistically, that's what we're asking for. It's this sovereign will that you implement, which is perfect and never falters. I want you to take that and apply it to me as if I have no will. It's a very difficult thing, but that's definitely not what we're thinking about when we go and we say, a crystal ball, tell me should I go left or right. It's definitely not what we're thinking about. But you could take, applying it to a specific example, like if we say we have a situation where I want to get married and I want to find the right partner, and you're saying, God, hypothetically, I've got this person, and I want to know what your will is. That particular question you pose, if you do not have a relationship with God and you've aligned with God, you're asking it for a very specific set of reasons. I don't know what they are, but there's definitely a specific reason. Is that person going to make me happy? Is that person going to make my life comfortable? Is that person going to let me do what I want, even if it's religiously motivated, but it's going to let me go to church when I want to? Is it going to let me have a spiritual life? Am I going to pray when I want to? That's what you're looking for, and that's what you want God to do. Whereas if you actually find God and you're aligned to God and you understand what God wants from marriage as a vehicle, you find, well, actually God's instituted marriage so that it can be the testing ground for virtue. It's like that's what he wants out of marriage. And so do I understand that? Do I believe that? Would I be willing that by choosing this person or this person, and there's difficulty that comes, would I accept that as a matter of a place where my virtue is being grown, even if that person is giving me a hard time and not giving me the comfort, and most of the time we're not. That's not what we're after. But that kind of explains what I was saying before, is that in order for us to know the will of God in our life, in specific situations, in specific contexts, we must be seeking Him constantly. We must be aligned. That's why when you go to an abuna or your father of confession and say, hey, I want to know the will of God, the first thing that is, you need to pray. It's like, why do you think prayer is the vehicle to the crystal ball? No, it's the prayer realigns your whole being to the will of God. To the point, like when you get to Christ, like if you take Christ as the perfect man in Gethsemane, you see this, hey, take this cup, but not my will, but yours. And so what you see in Christ is you see this perfect alignment of man's will to the will of God, to the point that there is no difference. That's how you know the will of God. So how do we do that? Well, you need to talk to Him. You need to go to the people that have gone before you and say, where is God? When you see the Desert Fathers, they go and sit with the elders and they say, give me a word that I may benefit. It's like, what are you saying? Well, you've gone before me. Tell me what's there, and then I can try and work that into my life. You go to the scripture, say, well, when you were here, what did you say? What did the people closest to you say? What are those people that were perfectly aligned to your will? Paul, who died, Peter, who died, all these saints that died on the hope of your resurrection. What did they say? And therefore I want to take that on. And then you want to go into the church and you want to practice. And you fail and you get it wrong. And you might choose the wrong partner. I don't know. But then God takes that and says, okay, but this is your vehicle. This is where you're going to be saved. This is the ground. I can take that failed marriage and turn it into salvation, turn it into goodness, turn it into you know what I mean? And I think if we don't have that, it's very difficult to find the will of God. And therefore I need to be in the church, and I need to be engaged with God. I need to be seeking Him constantly. And you find these people. I had my uncle who passed away was that type of person. He was so close to God that at any point in his life, he seemed to have, now I don't know if this is from his perspective, but from my perspective, looking to him, it's like at every point in his life, he knew exactly what to do. He knew exactly what God wanted. Even when he was dying, it was like, I know what God wants. And there's a story about him. After he died, we found out he had a tumor in the brain, and the tumor was on the part of the brain that had dealt with all the executive function. So when he was in palliative care, the doctors would say, well, you got to tell everyone that visits that he's probably going to be saying inappropriate stuff, and he's got no control. And after he died, the doctors would say that we've never seen anything like this, that he was able to keep his executive function and his ability to respond and talk to people with love and respect. He lost a lot of executive function, but it was the things that were aligned to the will of God, how you treat someone, the words you say, how you look at someone, all of those things he maintained perfect. We've never seen anything like it. It was the will of God was so much that even his brain didn't need to respond.
He had achieved the likeness.
Yeah, it's his brain was not part of it. It's it's in his spirit. His spirit was alive. It took over that brain function. And that's kind of where you want to go. Whereas looking at every situation just to abdicate my responsibility for a decision is really not trying to find the will of God.
I still think that in having that relationship with God, you do achieve that, in prayer, or you can achieve that sense of peace about a certain decision. I can see in my own life, maybe this is a very basic example, but I was on maternity leave and I had been made redundant from my previous position while on maternity
Congratulations.
leave.
Congratulations. That was a good move.
It was it was great, thank God. And so I was looking to reapply for a new position, and there was this job and there was 4 interviews in this position. And also, so Dora was at the time maybe 10 months or so, and we were having trouble finding her a place in childcare, and she kind of has condition and they didn't want to take care of her. It was very difficult. And so I remember praying once and being I want to go back to work, but I don't know what's right for me. I don't know if this is the right position for me. I don't know what we're going to do about Dora. And at the end of the day, whatever happens is in your hands, right? And I don't necessarily think I was abdicating that, but it was more I was
an earnest plea.
Yeah, and I was applying. I was interviewing for that position and other positions, and I didn't have a sense of peace about the other positions. And so I prayed about it, and then I had a sense of peace. I knew everything was going to be okay with Dora, and I knew I was going to get the job. And so within a couple of days, we found another place. Someone approached me and said, "Oh, have you tried this place?" And so that worked, and then I got the job. And so now in this position, I can be well, when things are tough, I can still throw it back on God. Yeah, as in I ask for your will, and you can help me.
Yeah, and I think it's a wonderful story to highlight this, is that how did you know that was actually the right decision? You prayed to God and you say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm making stuff up. I'm nervous and anxious and worried. I don't know what I'm doing. I want you next to me. I want you. So actually what you don't know if that was the right decision. All you know is that no matter what the decision was, you took a decision, and then God was right there to navigate it for you. It's there's a very different problem. It's not in the decision. It's in the fact that you said, hey, no matter what I do, you stay here.
Yeah.
You stay right next to me. You work it out because I am a nervous wreck. That's different to, because I prayed, he gave me the right decision.
Yeah.
It's probably not it might be the right decision or the wrong decision. It actually didn't matter. I guarantee you, if you chose the other decision, guess who was going to be next to you? God. And he's going to say, yeah, this is some good, some bad. I'm going to take a bit of good and a bit of bad. I'm going to make it useful to you and your family for their salvation and their goodness. And because the next time you might do that, he might give you something that's hard and tough, and it's like a slog and everything's difficult. And you might think, I made the wrong decision. God didn't give me his will. Because actually, that might be his will. You get what I'm trying to
100%.
say?
And I
Yeah.
think it's not even about what the outcome is. It's about the process of
Yeah.
stay with me and guide me. But also, I think it's really important that I do think God gives us a sense of peace at
100%.
times. And that is like, and sometimes He doesn't necessarily give the peace immediately about a certain thing, or, you know, no matter how much you pray. Or like recently, I had another friend who was going through relationship problems, and, you know, he really wanted this relationship to work, but he just didn't have that sense of peace, and it's been too long, and he was like, I can't, I'm just gaslighting myself into, you know, convincing myself that it's right, but it's not, you know. And I think that sense of peace is the most important thing, that we do have it, and that comes with walking with God and always seeking Him regardless of the action or the outcome of whatever it is.
And the thing is, the beauty of our Christianity and our God is that even if I walk in the worst possible situation, like think of Christ. I'm on a cross, nailed to the cross for something I didn't do by the people that I love the most in the world. It's like the worst possible thing, and yet I have peace. And this is kind of what he's saying, is like, even if I'm in the worst possible situation, there's one thing that we're guaranteed, is that in the midst of that, I will find Him, and because of that, I'll have peace.
Yeah.
And so He will give peace freely, and that is His sovereign will, that peace is on earth. You know, that is His sovereign will. It's like, you want it, you don't want it, I don't care, but I'm going to make peace available. If you seek it, you'll find it.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't get a say. No, you don't get a say. Peace will be here. You get what I mean? And that's the beauty of this, is like, hey, no matter the situation, where I'm going, I can still find peace. It's chaos, peace. Decision, left decision, right decision, this one, there's peace. That peace comes, definitely, I agree.
So is it good to maybe summarize and say that the will of God in our lives is about the internal transformation, the internal attainment of the kingdom of heaven, and that walking with God at all times, it's not so much the external manifestation of what I have accomplished or achieved, right?
Yeah, I would say that, and I would add to that no matter what we choose personally in a particular moment, in a particular context, is not as relevant as me seeking God constantly. And no matter what I choose, whether it's good or bad, His peace will always be available to me, and He can take what is good and what is bad and put it together and turn it good for my salvation. And so I shouldn't be scared of making decisions because I'm not clear. And I would add that if I'm using the idea of seeking God's will just to abdicate my decision, that's not the will of God. God wants you to make decisions. He wants you to take risks. He wants you to trust Him, and He wants you to know that no matter the situation that you're in, which is the present, He will be there and He will navigate you and help you. There is no one that could possibly make every decision and every move correctly. It's just not how life works.
There are still times when you're walking with God that you will achieve, or He will give you that peace. Because like that's what the Philippians verse says, yeah?
Can you read it again?
Yes. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guide your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus.
It's not that you will attain peace, but that peace will guide you. Is that not different?
And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guide your hearts and minds. But
is the question like that we got from behind the camera, like, I get peace once I've made a decision? No. Like, isn't that what we're saying? Like, I struggle when I feel like I made this decision, I've gotten peace, therefore I know it's the right decision. But this is saying peace is the guiding factor, not the end result.
It's not guide, it's guard.
Oh, God, not guide.
It will guard your hearts.
Oh, God,
and minds.
okay. I thought it was a guide.
So here, St. Paul is saying, you've been anxious for nothing. Your job isn't to be anxious. Your job is to say, I've got this problem and I want my request to be known to you, and in thankfulness, as in whether I have it or I don't, whether I know it or I don't, I thank you. When you thank, that peace that comes with gratefulness and thankfulness will guard your heart against any calamity that's about to fall on you. So he's not saying that it will give you peace that you know where to go. He's saying the moment that you can say, actually, I don't need to be anxious. All I need to do is say to him, hey, this is my problem, over to you, and I thank you whether you give me oranges or lemons. In that moment, that peace that you will never understand will guard your heart, whether you get lemons or whether you get oranges. That's what he's saying. It's not that peace will tell you where to go.
Everything will be okay.
Everything will be okay when you're thankful. And that's the reality. It's like you will no longer feel fear if you're grateful.
Again, it's that notion that God's will is not an emotion you receive. Again, is that what you're saying?
It's that because I can say to him, no matter what you give, no matter what happens, you're with me, and the request that I've is now with you. It's like you're loving God, and I've given it to you. And I thank you, whether it's this or that. At that point, that's when peace comes.
I generally agree with this. Not generally, I do agree that, I mean, that's got to be the case, because if I rely on anything else that's too stressful, it's going to be like whatever happens, happens.
If you think of, you have to think of it personally as well. It's like, you get bad news. Yeah, the first thing I want to do is just like run and blame him. Like, you're not going to let this happen. I don't want this ever to happen. Don't do this. I can't handle it. I don't want 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 it. What you've done is you've backed yourself into out of the thankfulness. Yeah, because now you're in desperation and you're in fear. When you're in fear, you feel pain. The pain, nothing's happened. What I've done is I've generated fear. And that fear is painful. And I can never find peace at that moment. There is no peace in that moment. And there will never ever be peace until I get to the point where I say, actually, you know what? I can't control this. No matter what I do, I can't control that. Therefore, whatever comes, I know you're going to be there, and we're going to work this out. And that's the only time you're going to have peace.
Does that answer
That's
your
what
question?
St. Paul is saying.
Like, isn't that the answer to your question?
Yeah, it does. I think the main, I guess, confusion was like when you hear all the time about, the measurement to how aligned you are with God's will is the feeling of peace. And I think that explains it as it really isn't the measurement,
It's a measurement
yeah.
of how aligned you are to the will of God. But it's not the indicator of decision making.
Yeah.
So if you can be at peace no matter the situation, you know that your will and the will of God is perfectly aligned. It's like Christ. Hey, I'm in Gethsemane. They're about to come and take me. No problem.
Yeah.
I have peace. That is different to I felt peace, and so now I know it's the red one.
Yeah, peace was pre-existing. It was there. You had it.
Peace is available.
Yeah.
All I have to do is be thankful.
So the absence of peace is not equal to,
Yeah.
I guess.
You see it in the liturgy. The liturgy has two things that coincide. There is the thanksgiving, and then there's the peace offering. They're constantly in the liturgical prayers. You have both. It's like the people saying, "Hey, thanks," and we do like the Orthodox people that have the. It's like I will thank you if my hands are full or my hands are empty. Yeah. So you've got this idea of thankfulness, and then you've got the idea of the priest constantly saying, "Peace be with you," or "The Lord be with you," which is liturgically the same thing. So like the peace of God is available, and we're constantly saying thank you no matter whether our hands are full or are empty. And it's like the liturgy is saying, you'll find the peace of Christ is always available. It's like it's not hidden. The only thing that will allow you to realize it is when you get truly thankful in whatever circumstance.
What would
And these
be,
two things coincide.
I guess, what would be the first step to attain that state of thankfulness and
Be anxious
realization?
for nothing, and in all things,
Thanksgiving.
thanksgiving.
But what
Through
does-
thanksgiving, make your request known to God. That's
but
how
what
you
does that
practice
look
it.
like? That's-
So
if
that
you-
it looks like this. It looks
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm feeling anxious.
Yeah.
You have to say, all right, can I control this? No, then it's over to you, God, because I can't control this. Like, what else do I do with it? Over to you, and I know that in your hands, I can thank you, because no matter if it comes this way or it comes this way, you will turn it to me for good. So every time you feel the anxiousness, the feeling of anxiousness is a God-given feeling to tell you when to thank Him. That's like, you can tell you, it's like, why did God give me anxiety? He gave me the feeling of anxiety so I know when I have to offer it to Him, because what I'm actually feeling is I have no control.
Yeah.
It's like, why does God allow me to feel pain? It's because I should never go back there at the same, so why does God give me the feeling of anxiety? Because He wants me to recognize at that moment, in that specific context, given my abilities, I can't control it. And the only thing I can do is rely on Him. And so every little thing, it's like, this morning I woke up, I was very anxious about my day. That is a good moment to say, it doesn't matter, I have to trust it. I can't control it. I've done everything I prepared, I've got nothing.
Yeah.
But no matter what happens, I'm going to thank you, because there is goodness.
You're recording?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
You recorded?
Yeah, I'm
Oh.
recording now. Thanks for listening.
No, you're not recording. You are?
Do you want a mic?
No. Thank you. Limited professionals.
Yeah, so I think that's the idea, is find every time we're feeling anxious on the little stuff. Like, we're so weak that if the big stuff comes, I'm going to be running under the table.
Yeah.
I'm screaming and pounding and telling him, don't do that. But it's the little stuff that I know I can build my...
Can I ask you this? In light of what you just said, what's your opinion on this idea? And I seriously wish I could remember the two American priests
No,
that
but
gave
first,
this idea.
because this is being recorded, when I'm saying the anxiety thing, I'm not talking about clinical anxiety.
Yeah, I was about to ask.
No, I'm talking about the feeling of anxiety.
Yeah.
Not clinical anxiety.
moment
That's a
when
different...
When you're
from-
feeling
Yeah.
anxious.
Yeah, that feeling,
Anxious
you know, when
versus
you're
clinical
like,
anxiety.
But I think the way
It's
you
just
put it
worry.
is so
Worry, yeah, that's
I guess
what
you put so much beauty to anxiety. I guess clinical anxiety or whatever it may be, like, okay, that's something else, but just we never actually we kind of fear the word fear anxiety. I guess the irony of it, but it's like,
But I don't want to say, because
Can I-
someone that has anxiety, there's a
Yeah.
clinical problem.
Of
It's
course.
not what
Yeah.
I
You
mean,
know,
yeah.
on the list of topics that we have,
Mm.
in the multitudes of my anxieties within me, your comforts delight my soul. This is a topic that for another time as well. So
Yeah,
we're going to
okay.
talk about this later. I thought about this. Sorry.
Good.
Anyway. All right. Yeah. All right. Anyway.
And there was is that it?
No. You want to ask a
Oh, you were
question?
going to say something
Yeah,
before I cut you off, sorry.
No. There was, I don't know the names of the two priests, but they were doing like a Q&A in America, and they said just off the cuff, you know when you hear like a comment off the cuff, but like it changes your entire life? Maybe this is a basic idea, but it was the first time I heard it, but it was like, there's this meme, Jesus take the wheel, but they were saying that's incorrect, and I think Western culture is based on Jesus take the wheel, this is all yours, but then he said, just like in a matter of 2 seconds, he was like, that's incorrect, you're in possession of the wheel, God is your passenger, so no matter what, he's with you. Maybe that's the relationship you were talking on before, but I thought it shifted my perspective in the way I lead my life. It's not that I'm passively going through my life in the passenger seat. I'm in control and I make the decisions, and God wants me to make decisions, but he's with me. So what do you say about that?
Like, so I would say, like, these, I don't know who these
Yeah, I
people
don't know who they are, but that idea.
Yeah, but the idea is, he's not a passenger. He's...
So Jesus take the wheel is real then?
No.
Not that
So
either?
you have the wheel, but he's the navigator.
He's
so,
the navigation
so
system.
he's like, you know, when you watch a race
Rally race.
a rally race, you have the navigator. It's the one that's calling out. You ever watch that?
ATC.
Yeah, is the navigator's calling out the turns. There's a turn ahead. There's this. There's a. He's navigating, not direction wise, but he's telling you what's happening so that you can respond to that.
And you think that's God's will, the navigation
I think
system?
God is there. God is not only as a passenger riding to make you feel good. He's telling you where to go. He's telling you what.
I see.
Giving you. He manifested himself in your reality, and took on an example so you know exactly what you should be doing and where you should be going. And then on top of that, in the event of an accident, he's also your airbag. He's like, you know what I mean? Like he's there, he'll engulf you with
Maybe that's also the thing
and
about
he's your
feeling-
emergency services department.
He's the brakes.
Lifestyle safety.
But yeah, I suppose so. So not only the passenger, but the navigation system and all of the safety features, I guess.
And he's also external. So not only is he internal to your vehicle, but you have to consider.
Don't tell me
him.
he's the car also.
No, he's the emergency in the event of an emergency.
He's the emergency
He's
services.
the external that could reach in to turn this accident into something useful for you.
And maybe that's what you guys were mentioning before about feeling like anxious or worried, like knowing that God is the navigation system or the emergency services quells that. Do you not think?
Yeah. Well, there's two. It's like knowing that he's there, knowing that he's navigating, telling you this is going to happen. Watch out, do this. Here's some examples. He's an active church that's been living for 2,000 years where you can go and see every turn. You know, have you ever watched Cool Runnings? No,
Has
man,
anyone
you
here
have to
watched Cool
watch
Runnings?
I have,
Runnings.
but
What
a
is
really
it?
long time ago.
Cool Runnings. It's about
They
the
have.
Jamaican bobsled team.
Oh.
And so I don't know anything about bobsledding, but I love.
I only know about the Australian guy in the Olympics that won out of like pure default. Everyone in front of him crashed.
Oh, okay.
That's it. That's all. That's the
No.
extent of my knowledge
This-
of bobsledding.
You have to watch Cool Runnings,
I
okay?
see.
So go and watch Cool Runnings. That's not ice. What is it?
She's talking about ice skating.
Was that ice skating?
No, bobsled. So I'm saying the bobsled
He
team.
was an Australian Olympian, right?
Okay, it was Australian, but it was ice skating.
Or was it? Maybe I'm thinking about the bobsledding, the guy that's suit ripped.
So
You know
bobsled.
what bobsledding is?
Yeah, it's like the four people, and they
the
go
big-
down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so they're
yeah,
going
yeah.
down the slide. The driver studies every turn because there's not enough time to react. So he has to know by instinct where the turn is, how much angle the turn is, how much is going to elevate, how much is going to, yeah? So where did he get the turns from? Like he's never gone down the course. Where did he get the turn from? Well, the turn comes from the people that engineered it, and the people that have gone down it, the people that have tested it, and they take pictures of every turn and they take all the dimensions and the movement of every turn and they give it to you. Now it's up to him to use it to understand how he behaves in the turn. But it's been given, and so the church is like Christ has given me the portfolio of every turn on the course. And that's the life of the church. We have saints, we have fathers, we have the tradition, we have the scripture. All of that is there to show me turns. It's like then I have to take that and I have to learn it, I have to sit with it, I have to study it, and I have to apply it. And then I have to turn the wheel to accommodate the turn. You know what I mean? Like this is the reality. Therefore, he's not just a passenger. You know, he gave you the turns. He was the guy that engineered the situation. He gave you a church, and he's everywhere. And that's why I don't like the idea of the passenger, because it makes you feel like he's sitting there, it's contained. He's not contained. He's everywhere and in everything and involved in everything. He just doesn't intervene like a puppeteer. You get what I'm trying to say?
It's a
Yeah.
much better conceptualization of that
I
kind
have a
of thing.
question as well. I just want to bring it back to like the feeling of peace thing. Just kind of relating it to my own life. Like I made one kind of, I'd say like a couple of years ago, probably like a pretty silly decision. But like I'm fine with it. I'm not complaining about it every day. At what point do I say that like, oh, this is me being deceiving? Like, you know, like how would I know that if I'm fine with something I made, can it be deceiving?
Deceiving of what?
Like,
What do you
as
mean?
in like, oh, I feel fine with this, but like I probably shouldn't be.
Like self-deception, you mean?
Yeah.
But doesn't that come back to what John was saying? It's not just about the momentary decision.
Yeah.
It's about, am I always walking with God? And we don't seek God's will only when we need the crystal ball or the decision. It's about, am I seeking Him regardless of if I need something or not? Like He's not just the transaction or the the provider.
So if you made a decision and you now recognise it's wrong, is that what you're saying? How do you deal with it, or what do you?
Yeah, no, not in the deal with it, but like, it's like I feel fine with it, but I don't feel like I should be. Like I feel like I should be making strides to change it. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm probably just not articulating it very well.
So there's a decision that was made. It wasn't necessarily wrong, but you think it's now possibly incorrect, and you should self-correct the course.
Yeah.
So
but
if
I
you
feel
can-
that motivation to.
But
do
if you
that.
can
Right,
control
that makes
it,
sense.
if
Does
you
that
can
make sense?
control it,
Yeah.
and you know it's bad, why wouldn't you change it?
Oh, it's a bit complicated.
Oh, okay.
Logistically speaking.
Very logistically speaking.
Well,
I'd have to uplift everything in my life.
But then, it comes back to Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to those who love God. So you love God, you walk with Him, and whatever situation you're in now, or whatever the circumstance, you might not see the fruit of it right now, but eventually, when you look back, you might be like, "Oh, this is actually what I got."
But
right?
it depends, because then it brings in the moral leg of the 3. Is if we were to say, actually, you know what, doesn't matter, God's going to fix it all up anyway, and therefore I just keep doing what I'm doing. It's like,
It depends on what it is, though.
yeah, that's not what we're saying.
Yeah.
Is that if you love God,
Yeah.
if you strive to find Him and you seek Him out and you thank Him for what He does, then even if you did something stupid, and when you do that stupid thing, you come to realization that that was a stupid thing, and then you continue to seek Him. In that moment, He'll do it for your salvation. He will not remove the consequences.
Yeah.
And this is a really big thing: is God does not remove the consequences of our actions. He restores our path to salvation regardless of the consequences. So if I decide to do something stupid, and that has consequences, jail or disease or whatever, bankruptcy,
child out of wedlock or something.
something like that. Well, that consequence will never go away. God's
Yeah.
not in the business of taking the consequence. But He'll say, you've recognized and you have sought me, and because you have sought, I'll give you peace. And that peace will not be in the consequence removal, but it will be, how do I make that consequence the vehicle for your salvation? So that child out of wedlock can become the place where you practice virtue. That jail is where you'll find the grace and the divine visitation. That disease is going to be the place where you recognize that you have no control, and your control is only found in the hand of God. You know what I mean? Like that. That's how it works. But He won't take your consequences away. And you have to recognize that you have not sought Him, and you made that decision in error. And therefore, He has to then make known to you what is the thing that He wants from you. And that's where the moral leg is. It's like He wants you to love your neighbor. He wants you to sacrifice yourself for others. He wants you to be in control of your eyes and your ears and your mouth and your heart. He wants you to do good every minute. Those things, He makes it clear. There's no ambiguity in God's moral code. Yeah, that's
a great answer.
That's the idea. And therefore, that is also His will. So we can't be. So if I go and decide how I'm going to have a relationship outside of marriage, and then I have a kid and the consequence is unbearable, it's like, and I'll turn around and say, well, look, there's God's will, or well, like, why didn't you tell me? Well, I did tell you. That's stupid. You shouldn't do it. You get what I mean? Like, it has to be clear enough. And in the absence, and this is why we don't look at the scripture alone. We have the scripture in the context of the church, because the church then takes it and contextualizes. Yeah, it's like the canons. If you look at the canons, we've got lots of church canons that are totally meaningless and useless because they were said in the 4th century. Do we delete them? No, because by looking at how the church applied that canon in the 4th century and its purpose, I can understand something about the church that I can apply today. You get what I mean?
Yes.
And that's why the church is alive like that.
Mm-hmm.
Statutory interpretation.
I don't know what you lawyers call it, but
It's like-
Sounds about right.
yeah. But that third leg, the moral leg, is
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah.
Is that he has to tell me what he expects of me, so that when I go against it, I know that I've gone wrong. When I realize, then his peace appears. It's like regardless of what you did, like you kill someone, you murder, you do, it doesn't matter. If I recognize that that was not what he wanted, and I acted outside of his will, and I recognize that, and then I start to seek him, his peace appears. Like, but I'm a bad person, doesn't matter, I don't care. That is my sovereign will, you can't do anything about it. It's there. You get what I'm trying to say? That's important. That's why those three legs fit together.
Mm.
But I would say if you know that it's wrong and you have a way to do it, in you doing it, exercising something to do, make the right decision, is you working inside to find what is the will of God. You're seeking God. Sometimes we try and partition God and life. So this is a life decision, but I know it's wrong, and I know I'm stuck in something that's not good. I've recognized that, and therefore, in me recognizing that I have to do something about it to correct it, is actually getting in sync with God. But not everything you think is wrong is actually wrong. That's another problem.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
I could make the most out of it, but like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's my situation is a very grey area.
Yeah.
Very grey.
Okay, cool.
Suppose that wraps it up for today's podcast, if I'm reading the room right. So thank you, everyone. So today on Let's Talk, we've discussed the will of God, from higher sovereignty to, I suppose, how it is enacted in our own lives and our decision making. If you have any ideas, I suppose, what you'd like to see, let us know. Thank you. That's it for today's Let's Talk.
Cool. Thank you.